I'm Brittany. This is Shenwei, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today we are finishing Volume 2 of Guardian. We were on page 267 for Chapter 18. Doing page math really quickly. Oh yeah. We are well within the range for finishing the volume today. So, we usually read for a couple of hours. We stop somewhere around the middle and take a little bit of a break so that I can get some more tea, etc. Please no spoilers in the chat because there's always at least a few people who are reading along for the very first time like I am, although I have seen the show. And I think that's it, actually. I think we can just slide right on into the ending of this volume. Which is low-key terrifying, but it's alright. It's alright. Okay. By the time Shenwei had dealt with all the Yochu on the peak of Kunlun Mountain, the stragglers were also gone, having at least some ability to read the room. Only Oxhead and Horseface remained, supporting the magistrate between them. They kept their distance from Shenwei as if they wanted to say something to him but were too afraid to approach. Shenwei extended a hand to Daqing. Come, I'll take you home. Daqing hesitated for a moment. His legs were stumpy and so was his courage, but it wouldn't do for a cat to be left alone in all this ice and snow, so his only real choice was to thank Shenwei timidly and jump onto his shoulder. Shenwei and Jiaolong Lan were actually built similarly, but somehow Daqing felt uncomfortable enough on this new perch that he had to curl up into a black puff of fur. The magistrate finally scraped together enough courage to call out, My lord? Shenwei put the blade away without breaking stride. Because he's got to be hot about it, right? You should all leave, he said, blank-faced, as he cut the magistrate off. Don't force me to be discourteous. What did I just say about being hot about it? The sky finally brightened as sunlight belatedly streamed down over them. The soul-executing emissary could cross great distances as if they were mere centimeters and travel thousands of kilometers in a heartbeat. It was barely past noon when he and Daqing returned to Jiaolong Lan's little apartment. All the TV stations were covering the morning's strange phenomenon, and since the mainstream media appeared to have nothing better to talk about, they were inviting all sorts of quack experts to come on air and expound on their wild theories. That sounds about right. Shenwei waited for a full 3 or 4 hours. As the afternoon sun began sliding westward, Shenwei's phone vibrated a few times on the table. Shenwei had only a passing familiarity with electronic devices, so he initially didn't react at all. Daqing had to meow delicately and nudge the phone toward him before he even took notice. A jolt ran through him as he seemed to reanimate. Unlocking his phone, he found 3 texts that had been sent in rapid succession. The first read, Signal at last. Nothing happened. I'll be home soon. The second, sent just a minute... Home soon? The second, sent just a minute later. Upper management's calling on me. There's a dinner I have to attend tonight. I just saw. Don't wait up. And the third one followed immediately. Go to bed early. Be good. Daqing circled halfway around the couch, gathering his courage to ask, with the utmost courtesy, My lord, was that our guardian? Shenwei nodded. He said he had some things to take care of and will be back later. Daqing let out a sigh of relief, hesitated again, and said, Then I'll take my leave and head over to the office. Shenwei lowered his eyes, and Daqing instinctively bowed his head under that gaze. He might have been an entirely different cat from the one who had always comfortably called him Shenlao She. Shenwei nodded again. Safe travels. Having been granted leave, Daqing sprang to his feet, unlocked the door, and jogged out. Jiaolong Lan did not, in fact, have some dinner to attend. This is so deeply unsurprising, and yet why did I believe him half a page ago? Why did I not immediately go, this bi bitch is lying? Why? In reality, he didn't go anywhere in particular. Having texted Shen Wei, he just wandered aimlessly through the streets of Dragon City. It was a chilly, damp winter with an abundance of snow and fog. The ground was glazed with frosted ice. A few shops along the road had already closed for the day, and not many pedestrians were out and about. It all gave the streets a desolate feeling. Zhao Yunlan's bloodshot eyes made him seem a little worse for wear. He was still just roaming around when his phone rang. He hesitated when he saw the caller ID, but ended up answering the call. "Hey, Dad." Said the voice on the other end of the line. "Why wasn't your phone in service?" The spot where he'd stopped to take the call was right in the wind. The cold, dry air blowing in his eyes made him even redder. He was a half a beat late to react. Maybe the signal wasn't very good. "Then where are you now?" asked his dad. Zhao Yunlan wasn't entirely sure. He hung up and shared his location on his phone, then hunkered down on the side of the road to wait. 20 minutes or so later, a car pulled up. The driver leaned out and fixed him with a judgmental look. "Why do you look like a panhandler? Get in." Zhao Yunlan gave a weak roll of his eyes and stood up while stomping his feet to get some feeling back into them. There was an aura of sorrow about him. Once he was in the car, his dad stepped on the gas and then glanced at him. "Where did you go, dressed up like that?" "The Tibetan Plateau," Zhao Yunlan said flatly. "For what?" "To help capture some poachers." "Cut the crap," said his father. Zhao Yunlan answered with silence, and eventually his father was the one who broke it. "Your mom told me a few days ago. I wasn't sure how to approach you about this, so I didn't come find you right away." Okay. I was already at peak stress because we have finally actually introduced the dad, but now we're gonna talk about it? Okay. Alright. Zhao Yunlan gave him a tired glance. Wasn't a brawl involving all three realms enough for one day, never mind the severe physical and emotional without a half-dead grunt of acknowledgement. His father kept talking. "When you were little, I was focused on advancing my career. I was too busy to pull my weight with you, but I didn't really think anything of it. Later, after you'd started school, your mom dragged me to the parents' club. On weekends, a bunch of us parents would sit and chat about our kids. That's when I realized you were different from the other children." He smiled helplessly. "Let's talk about this some other time, okay, Dad? I'm not really up for it today. I've already been too easy on you." Why is it always, I mean, we know why, but why is it always the more authoritarian parents who are like, "I was so easy on you"? Again, we know why, but that is always so maddening to me. And I didn't even have authoritarian parents. I can't with that shit. It speaks to they're entirely absent when it comes to their concept of being hard on a child. They have an entirely distorted thing, and when they say that, it's just testament to the fact that they have no idea, they have no clue what they have already done to their child. "Remember how I let you indulge your wild fantasies and apply to create some special investigations department? I even pulled some strings for you, but did I ever put my nose in your business? I'm giving you an inch here. Don't take a mile." Okay. All right. Zhao Yunlan leaned back. "Fine. What do you want to know?" "First, the cliched question. Will you break up with that teacher?" "Absolutely not." "Let's discuss this rationally," his dad said. "Tell me, what do you like about him? What's so special about him that he's irreplaceable? What about him is worth facing societal pressure and public opinion, never mind the issue of not having a legal marriage? Why is it that, even with all that stands between you two, it has to be him?" Mom's not as pretty as, hang on. Jiling Jija, I believe. Mom's not as pretty as Jiling Jija, which comes with a footnote. Lin Qiling, a Taiwanese model and actress, at one point widely considered one of the most desirable female celebrities in the sinosphere. Gotcha. Mom's not as pretty as Jiling Jija, so what made you give up on all the fish in the sea just to be with her? Zhao Yunlan replied, impatience creeping into his tone. To hell with public opinion. And what's the big deal about legality? I can draw myself a marriage certificate. There's all sorts of official seals sold near University Street carved out of white radishes. They're only 5 yuan a piece. I can put as many seals on it as I want. I'm trying to have a civil conversation here, said his dad. What's with your attitude? Okay. You just asked him to break up with his boyfriend and are questioning what's the point in ever having a relationship ever if you're like, I'm trying to have a civil sorry. I've had it up to here recently with these types of conversations. Zhao Yunlan lowered his head and gave his brow a firm pinch. Have you considered that once you've gotten your kicks and your hormones return to normal, you'll regret this decision? His dad continued steadily. Passion is a beautiful thing. I know how it is. I was young once too. But if a love faces too many obstacles, I don't condone pursuing it. Do you know why? Zhao Yunlan didn't answer. Have you read Anna Karenina? Who? I mean, I'm about to throw myself in front of a train, but outside of that, I don't see the relevance. The car crawled along the empty road at 20 miles an hour. Why did Anna die in the end? It was because an unfaithful love is immoral, because a third party gets hurt. And yes, that doesn't apply to you two, but your relationship still has something in common with that one. It's not accepted by mainstream society. Love is very resilient, but it's also delicate. In the face of oppression and obstacles, it can become a huge driving force, a love for the ages. There's a reason people have sung about it for all of human history. But remember, it's not the tall mountain in your path that defeats you. It's always the grain of sand in your shoe. What's your point? Both Zhao Yunlan and I said to him. His dad sighed. Sheer strength of will and sacrifice can carry a love past all the huge obstacles, but sooner or later, passion inevitably calms down. Have you thought about what happens then? You'll reach a point where seeing each other won't make you think about the way your hearts used to beat for one another when you first fell in love. Instead, you'll look into his eyes and only remember all the pain and suffering that being together brought you. How will you face him? How will he face you? Have you considered that? It happens to everyone. Don't think you'll be an exception. Do you still remember that ice cream you loved when you were a kid? Hold, please. Zhao Yunlan shook his head. Your mom never let you have junk food, so you obsessed over it day and night. You even had a hunger strike. Then one time, after I got back from a work trip, I had an idea. I took you to that shop 3 times a day, and every time I let you pick whatever you wanted. At least 2 tubs each time. Even when eating it all gave you an upset stomach, I didn't relent. You had no choice. For an entire month, I forced you to eat it until you started crying if that ice cream store was even mentioned. You clung to the door frame and refused to go. Dad of the year right there, Zhao Yunlan and I both said. Thank you, Octagonal. Oh, but he was easy on him. Calmly, because they're always so fucking calm, aren't they? His father continued. Now, think it over carefully before you answer. Do you really think you can continue like this with that teacher? Well, let me see. As I try to not scratch out my eye live in front of you guys. Let's see. Let's think about this. For reasons passing understanding, for whatever reason, this man freaking believes that a relationship that is hard won, in that the relationship must overcome exterior obstacles to even exist, right? Those relationships always sour because you just wind up looking at the other person and be like, and only seeing all the shit that it took to even get there, right? And then when passion fades, he's kind of saying it's not even worth it. And I'm like, I just don't understand. Like, sure, theoretically, I can kind of get how in certain relationships that may happen. But one, he's being very prescriptive and saying this happens constantly all the time and it's unavoidable, which is almost always fucking wrong to say that about anything ever. But then also, like, that's just so counter to my own experience. Like, I moved across the country to be with the woman who became my wife. I have a conservative mother. She has conservative parents. We were both raised in the South. She was born a little bit before me, but we came of age, you know, in like the 90s and the 2000s. And like, I had to get on medication to even realize that my feelings for her were like a thing, so that I could move 1,000 miles out of my hometown to go be with her. And then a year later I proposed, and then a few years later we were married. And you think when I look at her I just see all the fucking trouble? And moving here, driving 1,000 miles in the span of like a day and a half, on no sleep, I almost hit a deer. I was delirious. I had a cat in the front seat. You think that's what I see when I look at her? Bitch, skill issue. Get it together. Jiaolong Lan found and opened a bottle of water and gulped half of it down in one go. His voice still rasped when he spoke. Shen Wei and I have actually known each other for a long time. When I stop and think about it, I've known him since I first started working. That's several years now. Dad, I hear what you're saying, but there are people in the world where it's not about how great they are or how it feels like you can't live without them, but rather the feeling that if you do wrong by them, you're lower than scum. There's a good point. His dad glanced over at him. Jiaolong Lan slumped against the seat, his eyes half closed. Perhaps it was a lack of sleep, but his unusually heavy double eyelids almost seemed to fold into 3 layers. Jiaolong Lan's dad chewed over his answer for a while. Finally, he said, "You're an adult. There are some things I don't have the right to meddle in too much. Sometime when you're both free, you can bring him over for a meal when I'm home." Better than what I thought we were gonna get, but okay. Thanks. Jiaolong Lan had managed to defeat the boss, but he didn't look happy at all. His eyebrows were still knitted together lightly. After another stretch of silence, he said, "Dad, would you have a few drinks with me?" His dad gave him another glance and wordlessly turned the car around. They soon found themselves in a small, relatively quiet restaurant owned by a local. His dad opened the drink menu, pushed it toward Jiaolong Lan, and then ordered a pot of Iron Goddess tea for himself. Father and son sat across from each other, interestingly similar in temperament. Each drank their own drinks without bothering the other. Drinking alcohol didn't make Jiaolong Lan flush, quite the opposite. The more he drank, the paler he got. Once he'd gone through more than 2 bottles, his dad stopped him from calling for the server, then asked for a cup of honey water to be brought over. To Jiaolong Lan, he said, "You can drink a little when you're in a bad mood, but I'm your father. I have to keep an eye on you. I can't let you get alcohol poisoning or rot your gut with the stuff." After a pause, Jiaolong Lan said, "I haven't eaten yet. Get me a plate of fried rice." "Can you tell me what happened now? Did you and the teacher have a fight?" his dad asked. "Oh, please." With some difficulty, Jiaolong Lan managed to smile. "I'm way too old to get in a fight over something stupid." "Then what happened?" Jiaolong Lan stared at the marble tabletop as if trying to find a pattern in the irregular swirls. His eyes stayed fixated on it until his water and food came. Then, as if talking to himself, he murmured, "If you did something, and you don't know if it was right or wrong, what would you do?" His dad lit a cigarette. "Having lived this long, I feel like there are 4 things in life you can't be too persistent about figuring out. The idea of eternity, right or wrong, good and evil, and life and death." I kind of see where he's coming from, but also not entirely. Jiaolong Lan looked up at him as his father continued. "First, persistence can be a virtue, but if you're inflexible and insist that something must last forever, you'll fear loss even while you hold that thing in your hands." Okay, the worst person I know just made a point. You won't be able to see your path clearly. Second, of course you should have a sense of justice, but if you're consumed by the idea that something must be right or wrong, it's easy to develop tunnel vision. There aren't that many absolute rights or absolute wrongs in the world. The worst person I know... Third, while it's important to repent of your mistakes and strive for goodness, being locked into a dichotomy of good and evil will make you rigid and unforgiving. You'll become arrogant and expect the world to conform to your perspective, and you'll always be disappointed. And finally, while life and death are tremendously important, if you live your entire life in terror of death, you'll never really live at all. Not entirely without wisdom, I guess, although it physically pains me to give him credit. Silently, Jiaolong Lan kept listening. There are some things that aren't worth that kind of pondering. In my opinion, once you've made a decision, there's no need to be bogged down in thinking about whether it was right or wrong. Instead of torturing yourself with those thoughts, why not think about what you can do about it now? What do you think? Well, I could niggle at his phrasing a little bit, but the ultimate concept is very much don't torture yourself about, the past or past decisions. What can you do about it right now? Because that's all that you can do about it. That sentiment, understandable. Jiaolong Lan's heart jolted. A bit of brightness entered his dull gaze. After sitting stiffly for a while, he gulped down all the honey water before calmly saying, "I can't eat another bite. I'm going to go throw up now. After that, will you drive me home?" As requested, Jiaolong Lan's dad drove him to his apartment, but made no move to accompany him inside. "That teacher lives with you, right? He's unprepared, so I won't just show up without warning. Go on in. We can make proper plans at a later date." Jiaolong Lan waved without looking back and made his way upstairs with the starry night behind him. Shen Wei was still waiting up. Because of course. As soon as he heard the key, he got up and opened the door before Jiaolong Lan even got it unlocked. Jiaolong Lan looked sober enough, but he reeked of alcohol and tripped over the threshold as he came in. Shen Wei steadied him. "How much did you drink?" "I'm fine." Jiaolong Lan pressed his forehead into Shen Wei's shoulder. "I need a shower first thing. Is there anything to eat?" Shen Wei didn't know what to say. He had a bone to pick about Jiaolong Lan heading up Kunlun on his own without any warning, but the pitiful way he had a hand pressed to his stomach made it impossible for Shen Wei to speak up. He just sighed. "I'll go warm something up for you." Jiaolong Lan gave him a quick kiss on the cheek, then pulled out a long, narrow wooden box from his own inside pocket. "A gift," he said, pushing the box into Shen Wei's hands before disappearing into the bathroom. After a moment, Shen Wei opened the nicely wrapped wooden box to find a calligraphy brush inside. The brush's handle was made of wood, and its bristles glistened with gold. There was a transcendent, subtle sheen to it. Despite its ordinary size, it was unmistakably the merit brush. Just then, a loud noise from the bathroom startled Shen Wei. He tucked the hallowed artifact away and rushed to the door. "Yunlan, are you all right?" The bathroom had a tub with a shower head. Jiaolong Lan might have accidentally turned the water temperature up too high. He had been only a bit drunk when he got in, but the hot steam sent the alcohol in his system straight to his head. It made him careless, and he slipped and fell heavily against the bottom of the tub, golden stars swimming before his eyes. Shen Wei waited for a response, but when none came, he pushed open the bathroom door and came face to face with a reminder that no one showered with their clothes on. Zhao Yunlan was dazed from the fall, and the relentless stream of hot water only made the world spin faster around him. He grabbed the edge of the tub with both hands, struggling to get to his feet. The curve of his back showed off his sharp shoulder blades. Smooth lines of muscle met at his slim waist. The planes of his body were indescribably beautiful. A single glance was all it took for Shen Wei to overheat as well. Panicked, Shen Wei looked away and grabbed a large bath towel, then floundered as he turned off the shower. Still not looking, he extended his arms and flung the towel over Jiaolong Lan. Blushing right to the tips of his ears, with the thick towel between their bodies, he carefully got Jiaolong Lan out of the tub, half helping and half carrying him. On the upside, Jiaolong Lan's brain was still so sodden that he wasn't making things worse with his smart mouth. Jiaolong Lan's body heat quickly radiated through the towel, and since the towel wasn't up to the task of covering him completely, Shen Wei had intermittent glimpses of his long legs. Temples pounding, Shen Wei gently eased Jiaolong Lan down onto the bed. Then he yanked his hands back as though electrocuted and simply stood there at a loss. Seeing damp spots on the pillow finally brought him back to his senses. He draped the blanket over Jiaolong Lan before daring to take hold of a corner of the towel and carefully pull it out from beneath the blanket. But as he did so, Jiaolong Lan suddenly grabbed his hand. The drunkard was surprisingly strong, his palms warm and still damp from the shower. His half-open eyes were unfocused, his gaze lost, and his face was bright red. Shen Wei's throat felt like it was on fire, and his Adam's apple bobbed. Jiaolong Lan said something too muddled to make out. Shen Wei bent down and nervously leaned toward his mouth. What was that? The hand gripping his tightened. "I'm sorry," Jiaolong Lan mumbled, as if in a dream. "I am so sorry." Shen Wei froze. Slowly, he sat on the edge of the bed and gathered Jiaolong Lan close, still bundled in the blanket. He patted Jiaolong Lan's back softly. "What is there for you to be sorry for?" Jiaolong Lan flipped over and wrapped his arms around Shen Wei's waist, exposing the upper half of his own naked body. Shen Wei pulled the hand back, but then had nowhere to put it. It hung awkwardly in midair. Then, belatedly, he realized Jiaolong Lan was shaking all over. Wanting to raise Jiaolong Lan's head, Shen Wei attempted to break free, but Jiaolong Lan's embrace tightened into a death grip. With a start, Shen Wei felt a trace of wetness on his clothes and lifted Jiaolong Lan's chin. There were no visible tear tracks, but his eyes were all red. Jiaolong Lan had only been half drunk to begin with and capable of at least acting like a normal person, but between the alcohol going to his brain and the fall in the tub, his head felt far heavier now. He barely knew what he was saying, even as he repeated over and over, "I'm so sorry." Shen Wei felt as though his heart had been set ablaze. All the water in the world couldn't have extinguished the flame raging in his chest. In the dark quiet of the night, his hand finally came to rest on Jiaolong Lan's bare back. Every inch of warm skin tested his nerves. Eyes bottomless as the abyss, Shen Wei brought his mouth closer to Jiaolong Lan's ear. "Every living being under the sun has wronged me," he breathed. "All but you." Jiaolong Lan shook his head. A droplet hung from his eyelashes. It might have lingered from the shower, or it might have been a tear. He barely had the energy to speak. In all his 30 years of life, he had never felt such a crushing weight on his mind. Lowering his head, Shen Wei pressed trembling lips to Jiaolong Lan's eyes. He kissed that stray droplet, tasting its faint saltiness and bitterness. Barely audible, he said, "You gave me my life, my eyes. You gave me everything. How have you wronged me?" "If I'd known," Jiaolong Lan said in a haze, "if I'd known... I wish I'd killed you back then. I never would have..." He didn't continue. Shen Wei caught him up in an embrace. By now, the crumpled blanket had fallen away, lying uselessly off to the side. Shen Wei propped himself up with his hands on... I'm shorting out. Shen Wei propped himself up with his hands on either side of Jiaolong Lan's body, scarcely able to breathe. His chest heaved. "Kunlun, is it you?" Jiaolong Lan lay face up on the bed, a thread of tears streaming from the corner of his eye. His eyes suddenly closed, as though his heart held more pain than he could endure. Even his brow was tinged red. He didn't answer or respond to the question. Again and again he repeated, "I'm so sorry." 5,000 years beneath the sky on this mortal earth, and that's all you have to say to me? Shenwei asked quietly. He had once told Li Qian that in life there are only two things worth dying for: to fulfill your duty to your home and country, or to give your life for someone who truly knows you. Throughout history, people have spoken of sacrificing oneself for someone who truly understands them. Shenwei's willingness to die for Jiaolong Lan also encompassed a willingness to live for him, to give Jiaolong Lan everything he was and savor the resulting pain like honey. They all want Kunlun to return. In order to awaken his spirit, they went as far as destroying your vision to pry open your heavenly eye, and then demanded that you ascend Kunlun Mountain to face the great divine tree. Shenwei said softly. I'm going to reread that so that it can sink into my brain. They all want Kunlun to return. In order to awaken his spirit, they went as far as destroying your vision, to pry open your heavenly eye, and then demanded that you ascend Kunlun Mountain to face the great divine tree. Shenwei said softly. I want him back too. I miss him to the point of madness, but I can't bear you going back to how he was. Kunlun bore the weight of 10,000 mountains and rivers on his shoulders, and more. The natural order of things, the great seal, the reincarnation cycle. There's no room to breathe. I don't want you to live with that pain. All I want now is for you to be mortal and content. Voice muffled, Jiaolong Lan said, You were the one who sealed Da Qing's memories and severed the connection between me and the soul-guarding order. Shenwei shut his eyes piously. So I'll be a content mortal while you shoulder the weight of the great seal? Who are you to decide that? Jiaolong Lan's voice rasped painfully, barely a wisp of sound despite his best efforts. You accepted me that day because you thought a mortal life lasts barely 100 years, over in the blink of an eye. Next time I reincarnate, I'll just forget you again, right? Were you going to accompany me on this last stretch and then follow in Nuo's footsteps? Jiaolong Lan dragged Shenwei down by the collar, fingers trembling almost convulsively. His teeth gritted tightly together. I'll never allow it, not even in death. Shenwei let himself be pulled down. Half crazed, Jiaolong Lan hooked an arm around Shenwei's neck and took him in his arms, kissing him desperately. Nobody fucking move! He tore 2 buttons off Shenwei's shirt, baring an expanse of pale chest. Never, do you hear me? It was the first time their bodies had touched like this, skin on skin. The spark that ignited between them instantly became a wildfire, burning beyond any hope of control. It seamlessly blended with the memory of countless, intimate, tender midnight dreams from which Shenwei had bolted awake. This was like a grand dream that upended the mortal realm entirely. Dreaming, Shenwei had never known when he would wake or when it would fragment around him. Now, he found that the dream that could never see the light of day, the dream with the power to split the sky and shatter the earth, had always been born of the thoughts he didn't dare entertain in daylight. It had been the heart that was never able to bear itself, the heart that couldn't be born, couldn't die, couldn't be forgotten, and couldn't be remembered. At last, Shenwei's control broke. Reclaiming the upper hand, he turned Jiaolong Lan over beneath himself, pressing him down into the soft pillows. The dam in his heart finally burst, unleashing torrential floods. I kind of thought we'd get this was the type of series to do a fade to black. But I think that wasn't at the end of the chapter. That was just a scene break. I'm just giving myself a second to readjust the cosmos that they knocked out of line. Whew. Ay. Okay. We're in the middle of page 281. Still in chapter 18. Although it feels like, yeah, we're just a couple of pages away from the end of the chapter, which will be perfect timing to walk off this chapter for the break. All right. I can speak. I can read. This is fine. Damn. The next day, Jiaolong Lan was woken up by sunlight streaming in through the curtains. He was disoriented for a while, thinking he might have eaten his own brain as a drinking snack the night before. It felt like he'd spent the entire night in a daze. He tried to open his eyes, but the lids were too heavy. The slightest movement made the ceiling spin. He fell back down against the mattress. Had he been able to look in a mirror, he would have seen that his face was horribly ashen, far more so than the face of someone who just felt a little weak. It was the face of someone worryingly near their deathbed. Hands carefully helped him sit up, and a bowl was brought to his lips. Whatever the medicine was, Jiaolong Lan didn't recognize it. The smell was incredibly strange, raw, and visceral. He instinctively shied back. What? Herbal medicine. I hurt you last night. Shen Wei's tone was very gentle, but his actions were not. He turned Jiaolong Lan's face firmly and all but force-fed the stuff to him. Jiaolong Lan regained some energy at once. He shoved Shen Wei's hand away, gagging so hard that he dissolved into a coughing fit. The vile taste had him on the edge of throwing up. Then a glass of water touched his mouth. Finally wide awake, he opened his eyes, glanced at Shen Wei, and drank the water silently. Afterward, he sat up, leaning against the headboard with his elbows on his knees. He gave Shen Wei a dejected look, then lowered his head and reflected. Eventually, after yet another dejected glance, he forced some words out. I've always topped before. Even if you didn't check with me first, couldn't you have been a little nicer about it? Shen Wei flushed red. He looked away and coughed awkwardly. I'm sorry. Jiaolong Lan began, but the soreness at his waist made his expression twist. He gasped faintly, then caught sight of Shen Wei's expression. Shen Wei looked as if Jiaolong Lan had somehow been the one taking advantage, not the other way around. Sure, he'd always dreamed of dying in some beauty's bed, but this was not what he'd had in mind. What the fuck? Jiaolong Lan's face flushed red, then purple. Then he looked down at the bowl that had held the unfamiliar medicine, and the thought of the flavor made his face twist again. Bring me another glass of water. Shen Wei got up immediately. Jiaolong Lan couldn't resist adding, anti-inflammatories would have been fine. Shen Wei took the bowl from him. This is effective. I wouldn't harm you. Stone-faced, Jiaolong Lan said, I'd prefer if you didn't try to torment me to death. The gentlemanly Shen Lo She stood there with the expression of someone who had brought shame upon his family. He looked uncannily like a pitiful wife who had accidentally smashed a bowl. It infuriated Jiaolong Lan enough to not want to look at him. Shen Wei timidly approached and helped ease him back down. You should sleep a little more. Do you want to eat anything? Yes, you, Jiaolong Lan said stubbornly. Lie down and let me ravage you. Yeah, we thought, okay? We thought Jiaolong Lan was bad enough pre-railing, but now, insufferable. He's never going to shut up about it. He will always be, I'm very excited about this. Where on earth there I am. Shen Wei lowered his gaze, the tips of his ears burning. He licked his lips awkwardly and asked, What nonsense are you going on about in broad daylight? For fuck's sake, Jiaolong Lan thought. Shenwei had treated him without a medical license, but whatever the medicine had been, it seemed like drowsiness was a side effect. Zhao Yunlan's head had barely touched the pillow again, and his consciousness was already blurring. But he still held onto Shenwei's hand, not giving up. I've already given all of myself to you, so don't try to start any shit. You hear me? The natural order can't stop humans from finding a way. The Great Seal, I have a solution. I have... His voice weakened with every word. Shenwei rested his palm against Zhao Yunlan's forehead, feeling his breathing even out slowly. Thanks to the herbal medicine, some color was returning to Zhao Yunlan's gray cheeks. Relieved, Shenwei stood up quietly and went to the kitchen to wash the bowl. Zhao Yunlan slept until the evening, dreaming chaotic, fragmented dreams the whole time. Now that's the end of the chapter. I love how we're just left to assume the content of these chaotic dreams. Yeah, okay. Big mystery there. Huge. Oh, we did start late, so I guess... Hang on. Apologies for starting late today, by the way. I scheduled the stream for 3:15, but we usually start at 3. And that was because the wife had a half day of work today, and so she's like here, and that always throws schedules into a whack, right? So we had to start a little late today, which means, let me see, if there isn't a good stopping point, which it doesn't seem like there is, it seems like, yeah, chapter 19 is the last chapter. So we are going to go ahead and break here for just a few minutes, grab some more tea, stand up, walk around, listen to some music. I'll have lo-fi going, but obviously, you know, listen to what you want. I will be back in just a few minutes, and we'll finish the volume when we come back. So don't go anywhere. Unless you have to go to the bathroom. You can go to the bathroom and get something to eat. You know what I mean. I'll be right back. Welcome back. So, making sure I'm still like in frame over here in all the correct ways. Alrighty, let us start the last chapter of Volume 2 of Guardian. But let me get my face out of the way first. There we are. Alright, well, how we're going to follow that, we're not entirely sure. But, leave it to Priest. That day when Jiaolong Lan, we're on page 285. So sorry, we're on page 285 for chapter 19. That day when Jiaolong Lan had walked into the great divine tree, the merit brush wasn't the only thing he came back out with. The great divine tree and Kunlun mountain were connected at the roots, cradling the full history of 5,000 years. As Jiaolong Lan walked inside, he felt as if he'd entered an alternate dimension. When he looked back, there was no sign of where he'd come from, while what lay ahead seemed to stretch out before him in an infinite expanse. There was no light around him at all, and the air was stagnant. He was in absolute blackness, but he kept squinting into the distance and finally found a dim pinprick of light, small as a firefly. As he approached, he saw it was the merit brush, now shrunk to the size of an ordinary calligraphy brush. He reached out for it. Somewhat to his surprise, he was able to take hold of it with almost no effort. However, as soon as he had it in his hand, he began to feel a pull through the brush, leading him forward. Logically, Jiaolong Lan knew that, having gotten what he'd come for, he should immediately start finding a way back out, but in that moment, for whatever reason, he couldn't help moving toward whatever was drawing him in deeper. He couldn't have said how long he walked through the darkness. His phone was unresponsive, his lighter wouldn't even throw a spark, all the light sources he had on him had stopped working. Fortunately, his resolve was firm, and he had no fear of darkness or enclosed spaces. The darkness surrounding him was unique. Being inside it wasn't uncomfortable at all. In fact, he got the sense that he was meant to sleep soundly here. He yawned as he walked, feeling himself grow drowsy. There came a huge crack by his ear. Before he could figure out what had caused it, it was followed by another huge noise. The darkness shattered and cold light poured in. Jiaolong Lan jumped and backed up a dozen or so steps before looking up. He had to immediately close his eyes against the vast swath of light shining down upon him. Cracking his eyes open the tiniest bit, he saw a giant axe. The axe was what had split the darkness open. Yet another loud noise sounded. A fissure opened beneath his feet and rapidly widened and lengthened, dividing the ground. The great axe was brandished by a man of incomparable size, whose head touched the very sky while his feet were planted firmly upon the earth. His hair and beard were untamed. His mouth opened and unleashed an angry roar that quaked the whole world. It came to pass that Pangu's cleverness surpassed that of the heavens, and his strength eclipsed that of the earth. Each day the sky rose higher, the earth grew thicker, and Pangu grew taller. In this way 18,000 years passed. The height of the sky and the depth of the earth attained incredible vastness, and so too did Pangu grow taller still. When the day came that 90,000 li lay between the sky and the ground, When the day came that 90,000 li lay between the sky and the ground, then too came the three sovereigns. Footnote from Sanwu Liege, the historical account of the three sovereigns and 5 emperors, attributed to a 3rd century author, Shuzhong. This, then, was Pangu. Before Jiaolong Lan's eyes, the sky ascended and the ground thickened. He saw Pangu plummet with a mighty crash, his axe breaking in two as it fell. Its long handle became Buzhou Mountain, and its massive head became Kunlun Mountain. The man's own limbs and head became 8 great mountains spread across the land, rising steeply from the earth to stand tall and support the sky. After that came the rivers and lakes, the sun and moon, the mountain creeks and deep valleys. As the rivers of time flowed into the sea, an unnamed sorrow flowed into Jiaolong Lan's heart. He couldn't help coming closer, wanting another look at this man to whom he was bound by blood. But he only. I'm freaking out. I'm freaking out. Calm down. It's fine. This is a really cool ass creation myth. It's fine. He couldn't help coming closer, wanting another look at this man to whom he was bound by blood, but he only managed to get there in time to bear witness as Pangu soundlessly disappeared in front of his eyes. Jiaolong Lan spun back around and found that he was already in the endless great wild. Tens of thousands of years rushed past him. He heard the blowing wind of Buzhou and also the turbulence stirring deep within the earth, but none of them left even the barest traces behind. All these things that lay beneath the earth, whether sincere, brutal, insolent, unrestrained, or wild, were connected to the true bloodline of Kunlun. Kunlun Mountain was born from the heavens and nurtured by the earth. Over the course of 1,003,000 years, it developed a soul and was given the title of Kunlun Jun, the mountain god of the great wild. I'm repeating that. Kunlun Mountain was born from the heavens and nurtured by the earth. Over the course of 1,003,000 years, it developed a soul and was given the title of Kunlun Jun, the mountain god of the great wild. We love a mountain. In those days, the 3 sovereigns were still young and the 5 emperors had yet to be born. Between the sky and the earth, there were no humans. At that point, Jiaolong Lan's memories became jumbled. On the one hand, he knew where he'd come from. He kept a firm grip on the merit brush. On the other hand, he now remembered being an unruly brat who had run and frolicked all over the mountains, causing mischief wherever he went. Shocking nobody! He had hugged the great god Fushi's tail while peeing on it. The phoenix that had once perched upon the great divine tree had been forced to move because of his antics, and from then on it only perched atop parasol trees. Sometime later, Nua found a tiny newborn beast from somewhere, a mutant mutt of the white tiger tribe, covered in black fuzz from the tip of his nose to the tip of his tail. He had yet to gain awareness and had been rejected by his own tribe, so he was placed in Kunlun's care. No! No! The poor little thing was very weak. Surrounded by the eternal ice on Kunlun Mountain, he seemed likely to die at any moment. It was the first time Kunlun Jun had seen such a troublesome little thing. Seeing no other choice, he personally melted some golden sand and crafted a bell to anchor the tiny beast's soul and open his mind. Then he hung the bell around the beast's neck. Stop it! All in all, it took an unbelievable amount of effort to be sure the little thing would survive, never mind thrive. As a result, Kunlun no longer had time to cause trouble for anyone else. No! I know it's hilarious that, like, this is what's breaking me, given what we just read, but, like, you're basically expecting that, right? That's much more on my radar. I wasn't expecting to be in the middle of this right now. I wasn't expecting to get like Daching origin. I was not prepared. Not at all. No wonder he just found him again. Of course he would. He's his next time. Okay. I have cats, as you may or may not know. So this is... Just stop. It wasn't until the puny beast reached the size of a dumpling and was able to run and jump that Kunlun went down the mountain, bringing the beast along. That was when he came across Nua, who was making humans out of mud. With an effortless flick of an immortal branch, countless people were born on the ground. They looked no different from the gods and demons themselves. Kunlun Jun had never witnessed such bustle and commotion. For a time, he was utterly enthralled and unwilling to look away. Nua smiled at him. Kunlun, you've grown so much. Kunlun walked over carefully. He and the mud person Nua had just made stared at each other for some time. I'm done. I'm already fucking done. He watched as the human grew from a child to a youth in the blink of an eye. The youth worshipped him with reverence and awe, but before they could even rise from their brow, middle age was upon them. Next, they began to shed their head of black hair, which was now frosted white. Finally, they collapsed in abject weariness and rejoined the mud from which they'd come. It was a life as fleeting as fire and smoke. Yeah, to an immortal. Why am I so itchy today? To an immortal. Also, Kunlun was the first, because you can't tell me that wasn't Shen Wei. So, Kunlun was the first one to watch the other age, and Priest is really, really trying a bitch today. She's really working on making me hate her. She's working on it. She's getting there. An unspeakable envy suddenly bloomed in Kunlun Jun's heart. Perhaps because his own time was beyond measure, he was somewhat jealous of these brilliant lives that burned with the brightness of a meteor. He scooped up some mud in his hands. What are they called? Nua said, These are humans. Without considering his words, Kunlun replied, How lovely they are. They carry the scent of mud with them. Hearing that, Nua's expression transformed. Okay, so maybe it was just the first person he had ever witnessed coming out. Maybe it wasn't Shen Wei, but don't put it past her. You know what I mean? For an instant, her features twisted as though she were consumed with shock and panic. But Kunlun was still young. What did he know beyond rampaging around the Great Divine Tree with his furball cat, causing trouble? How could he have looked at her gaze and grasped that in that moment she had perceived that innumerous trials and calamities lay ahead? Humans were born from mud, through which the chaotic evil beneath the ground was able to enter them and become the three worms. By the time Nua realized what had happened, humans had already started living together happily like monkeys. They had even followed her rules by separating into men and women, forging marital ties, and perpetuating their bloodlines. These people of mud were already roaming across all the mountains and lands, and even into the rivers and the sea on the edge of the great wild. Countless days and months. Nua looked back and saw how the human world bustled with life, the smoke of communal fires rising through the air. Men Aha. Okay. It should be coming back, yeah? It might be time for me to get a different cord for this microphone. Actually, I'm way overdue for just exchanging my microphone. I have a new microphone sitting right here that has yet to be hooked up because I haven't had the time, but I'm doing that over my break. Sorry about that. Let me see. Yeah, back good. Okay, awesome. I don't suppose anybody clocked when the sound went out, did it? Like what line or paragraph? If the video was glitching, I got nothing about that. Okay, no, that looks okay. Several generations passed. Thank you. All right. I was over here. Okay, cool. I got you. Several generations passed. Nua looked back and saw how the human world bustled with life, the smoke of communal fires rising through the air. Men and women were clad in animal furs, and children played in groups. They were a happy, cheerful people with features no different from those of the gods and demons. What was done was done. The only possible way to reverse it would be to utterly annihilate humanity. The heavens had already blessed Nua with great merits for her creation. She suddenly looked up at the sky with its disorderly swirls of stars and felt as if she had caught the first glimpse of something cold, restraining her from every direction. It was like an invisible, unstoppable hand pushing all humans and gods forward. Nua covered her face and sobbed. Kunlun and the little beast stood helplessly aside. Later, Nua sought help from the great god Fuxi, borrowing 3,000 stars from the Milky Way. Together, the two of them spent 33 days weaving a great seal that covered the entire ground. Kunlun sat and watched, hugging his tiny fur ball. He had never supposed that so much magma lay below the land, erupting forth with a roar from the deepest places underground. The two onlookers had only the faintest idea of what they were seeing, unaware that they had experienced a battle fiercer than even the great war of gods and demons, or the battle of the creation of gods, which were yet to come. Finally, Fuxi, ooh, that's a good question, made a bagua and forced the great seal down. No. In doing so, both he and the chaotic evil underground suffered greatly, but the great seal was formed. Once it was accomplished, Kunlun never saw Fuxia again. Nua borrowed a branch of the great divine tree from Kunlun and planted it at the entrance of the great seal, thus demoting all that lay beneath it as place of great disrespect. When the great seal was first established, Kunlun felt the pang of emptiness in his heart. The brutality and evil of the now sealed chaos were like a tiny flame, scorching and dangerous. Given the slightest chance, it would bring about calamitous disaster. But it also burned hot and free, and Kunlun found himself yearning for it, ever so slightly. The young Kunlun couldn't say exactly what he was feeling, but he shed a string of inexplicable tears from which the Yangtze River later sprang. Fuxia had disappeared, leaving Nua alone. She wandered the great wild earth on her own, watching the people who rose with the sun and rested as it set, struggling to survive. The worry on her face only deepened. In the end, Nua went into seclusion and would see no one. Kunlun Jun, in turn, returned to his Kunlun Mountain. During the turning of 100 years, he passed the place of great disrespect several times and looked at that withered branch of the great divine tree. As time passed, he grew to understand many more things. Gradually, he realized what was locked behind the great seal and understood, if only vaguely, the intentions of the sages who had come before. But although curiosity burned within him, Kunlun never indulged it. He never took a single step inside. He remembered the deep red heart's blood that Fuxia had vomited up when the Bagua first settled, and would never do anything that might undermine that sacrifice. But the seeds of the three worms had already been planted. Time passed. The human sovereign, there's a footnote, the human sovereign is the third of the three sovereigns in some myths after the heavenly and earthly sovereigns. Other sources give this title to Fuxia, Nua, and Shenong, with some other variations. The human sovereign rose to the level of sage. Shenong's lineage declined. Xuanyuan, the Yellow Emperor, reigned over the humans while the Wu and Yao worshipped the ancient war god Chio. Xuanyuan and Chio engaged in battle so fierce that it dragged in the gods and demons, who were already diminishing, and the Wu and Yao, who had not come into their own. The entirety of the three realms was ensnared by this great catastrophe. With the three sovereigns either defeated or vanished, the land that had been all but deserted was suddenly swarming with activity. The happy little mud people Kunlun remembered had become something he could barely fathom. They were pious and strong, warm and joyful, and yet they would fight and kill in the name of survival and power. Humans contained qualities of both gods and demons, which enabled them, more than any other kind of living being, to form emotions of all kinds: jealousy, animosity, obsession, restraint, and unparalleled love and hatred. It was then, finally, that Kunlun understood why Nuwa had been so fearful and panicked despite the merits rained down on her by the heavens for her creations of humans. The chaos that Pengu had torn asunder had never truly disappeared. Rather, it had infused itself into everything that existed in the world, and there it was still, ever-changing. It came to pass that the fires of war spread across the three realms. Even the heavens quaked with the impact, and the Kunpeng, footnote, Kunpeng is a mythological creature that can transform between its fish form Kun and its bird form Peng. Makes sense. The Kunpeng traveled west, never to return. Kunlun watched coldly from the sidelines as the first great war of gods and demons raged. Seemingly influenced by the roiling malevolence, his heart, which had been pristine for all those thousands of years, came to harbor uncontrollable sorrow and frustration and unquenchable loneliness. It seemed that Chio had foreseen his own defeat. His divine spirit left his body and came to the foot of Kunlun Mountain only for Kunlun Jun to close his doors and refuse to see him. Thus, the three-headed, six-armed war god climbed all the way up the mountain on his own 2 feet. His clothes were tattered, and he left a trail of blood in his wake, which would later become the galsang flowers that bloomed despite the harsh, frozen ground beneath the glaciers. Chio begged Kunlun Jun to look after the Wu and Yao on the grounds that they had been born in these mountains. When Kunlun Jun again refused to see him, Chio knelt just outside the boundary, kowtowing again and again. Kunlun had lived a long, long time in this frozen land. His heart was colder and harder than the frozen stone of the mountain's peak. But his furball companion had been born a Yao, and so couldn't help being drawn to the ancestor of the Yao. The little cat crept out and licked the blood from the wound that had opened on Chio's forehead after so much kowtowing against the ground. By the time Kunlun Jun noticed, the wheels of fate had been set in motion. At long last, the mountain god of the great wild, like Nuwa before him, was forced onto the path he had so desperately tried and failed to avoid, the path that would carry him to his predestined end. Chio died in battle and became the blood maple forest. Xuanyuan, the Yellow Emperor, admired his courage and fierceness and gave him the title of war god. To repay Chio, Kunlun Jun took the Wu and Yao under his wing. From that day on, all Wu and Yao belonged to Kunlun and were sheltered by the mountains. Kunlun Jun never once left the mountain. He continued to wait. He had watched Fuxia fall, seen Nuwa go into seclusion, and witnessed Shennong lose his divine powers and subsequently disappear, and he had been waiting ever since. When he saw Xuanyuan pick up Chio's head, he said nothing. He was waiting for someone, anyone, to return peace to the world. Anyone at all. He was waiting for the Yellow Emperor to unify the land and for the fighting to finally cease. But that never happened. Even after the great war of gods and demons, peace never came. Xuanyuan's entire life was one of battle. When things finally took a turn for the better, he quietly departed the mortal realm. Following his death, the descendants of the Flame and Yellow Emperors became locked in a struggle for power. The east was no more peaceful. Chio's descendant, He, happened across the great bow Fuxia had left behind. He gave himself the title, Emperor Jun, and traveled into the depths of the Great Wild, unifying all the tribes to the east and making allies of the Wu of the Great Wild. Kunlun remembered that year, when all the crows were silent. Conflict arose again between Shennong's descendants, who had lain low for many years, the water god Gonggong and Zhuanshu, the descendant of Xuanyuan. As Gonggong commanded water, the dragon tribes, spirits of the water, were the first to take sides. Consequently, Countless Yao were drawn into the conflict. Although Huya wasn't involved in that battle of the Central Plains, the Wu and the Yao, both under the protection of the mountain god, had already started showing signs of going separate ways. Innumerable Yao died in that battle. So much blood was shed that it formed rivers atop which shields could float. Tumult gripped the entire continent. The souls of the Yao trapped on the earth's surface cried in despair day in and day out. The ground was covered in scorched dirt. In death, Chio had gained the respect of his greatest enemy. But the descendants for whom he worried until his final breath burned down his war god temple. I think it's Chio, now that I'm saying it. Slowly, the humans, the Wu, and the Yao all forgot about this ancestor, and the brutal but brave inheritance he had left in their blood. Chio was slowly recast as an evil god with twisted features and mortal legends. Kunlun finally lost hope. He finally came to understand that when Nua had first created humans, she had already foreseen this foulness overtaking the three realms. With no way to prevent it, she had spent thousands of years, each day like the last, refusing to hear or inquire about the issue. Kunlun Jun ruled 10,000 great mountains in the mortal realm, and in accordance with his vow to Chio, he had cared for the Wu and Yao who lived off the mountains for many years. He had watched as they grew up, cultivated, and entered the world, and now they were dying in batches, like worthless weeds tossed into an open fire. If this was the will of the heavens... Later, Gonggong was defeated and made his escape astride the divine dragon, preparing to rise once again when the stars aligned. The dragon tribe had always been precious to Kunlun Jun's heart, but when they reached the northwestern abyss, he still mercilessly blinded the divine dragon. Gonggong and the divine dragon both ran into Buzhou Mountain, knocking a vast hole in the great Fuxia seal below. The place of great disrespect shook as tens of thousands of Gui cried out as one, and tremendous evil erupted into the very sky. The Gui, like the god born atop the mountain peak, were wholly without fear. They swept across Buzhou Mountain, whistling like the wind. Aiding them with the soul fire on his left shoulder, Kunlun Jun woke the silent underworld in its entirety. He broke apart the pillars of heaven, and thus the sky fell and the earth sank. To what... Hang on. Emphasis and syllable. One. To what is the axis of the sky... to what is the axis of the sky tied? Gotcha. How far and to where do the sky's edges extend? Where are the 8 pillars that hold up the sky? Why is the southeast sunken? That's a footnote. That was from the poem Heavenly Questions by Warring States era poet Ku Yuan. Atop the peak of Kunlun, the lofty mountain god of the great wild finally set foot upon a path in no way akin to the path of the gods who had come before him. Nua finally resurfaced after her long absence to find that her old friend had changed, almost beyond recognition. Kunlun's green robes billowed in the great winds atop the mountain, and his gaze was sharp and fierce, vaguely reminiscent of the axe that had once split the sky from the earth. Kunlun Jun had sent his little furball, who had been at his side for so long, to the world below. As the pillars of heaven collapsed with a thunderous roar, he glanced back, hands folded behind him. His face betrayed no shock upon seeing Nua there. He simply said, "I've done what you couldn't bear to, what you feared to do back then. I've done it for you." Pangu used every scrap of his life to separate the earth and the sky, shattering the dark nothingness. In the end, driven by heaven's will, he died of exhaustion. But the gods in the great wild, who fed upon wind and slept on dew, why should they bend the knee to something as imaginary as heaven's will? Why should they be controlled by it? Why should they have to bow to fate? "I want Zhuanshu's people to die along with my innocent lands of the great wild," Kunlun said. "I want every connection between the heaven and earth to be severed, that the so-called gods above can no longer spy upon us. I want the path to heaven to be broken. All living things in the world will support each other through yin and yang like the Fuxia Bagua. Everything that exists will be shaped according to its own will. I don't want anyone to control my fate anymore. Let there be no one who can judge my merits and sins. I wish to turn the withered divine tree at the place of great disrespect into a brush, with which every living being can inscribe their own merits and sins, their rights and wrongs. I want a clean slate. Nua was unable to speak. Let all who remain come at me. Pongu and Fusha are gone. Only you and I are left. You're biding your time, but I refuse to accept this. The sound of Kunlun Jun's sudden laugh was so broken that it might not have been a voice at all. He pointed skyward. Let them send thunder down upon me if they can. Let them blast Kunlun Mountain open. Let them strike me down and kill me. Nothing else will make me accept their will. With every sentence he spoke, a flash of divine lightning struck. The air at the mountain's peak was filled with flying ice and snow, blinding Nua to the point of tears, and through it all, she heard only Kunlun Jun's laughter. Thunder crashed down for an entire night. Relentless rain fell for several days. The Gui terrorized everything. The next day there was no sign of Kunlun Jun's, raiment, and every part of him was charred black, but he sat naked in the same spot. After a while he got to his feet. His blackened flesh, sloughed off like a molting snake, leaving only new skin behind. He reached out, and a leaf from the great divine tree fell into his hand. He curled it upon himself, and it became fresh green robes. Kunlun Jun gathered his loose hair back and straightened his spine. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, then looked up at Nua with an arrogant smile, lips still stained with the blood he didn't bother wiping away. See? What can they do to me? That smile, at least, was the same as always. It held a kind of careless innocence. Nua finally found her voice. Kunlun, the sky is broken. Come help me find the rocks to repair it. Don't be stubborn. Kunlun Jun only laughed quietly. He walked down the mountain without a backward glance. Pongu had died of exhaustion, leaving behind the power to create worlds and birth gods. Then the heavens had used Nua to create humans, planting countless seeds of omens. Fusha said nothing directly, but left a hint with the Bagua. In the end, he was also unable to escape the will of the heavens. Shenong's people had waned, gradually becoming ordinary. Only Nua, overly cautious, had remained. The heavens seemed disinclined to let the power to create worlds remain in the mortal realm, and thus, one by one, the gods born from Pongu's powers fell. One day it would be Kunlun Jun's turn. He already felt his death looming. But why? In this world, were only the weak and unenlightened permitted to eke out bare survival, living lives no longer than a day, then he, the mountain god of the great wild, would be the first to go against the heavens. Kunlun Jun descended from the mountain and found the world full of the evil beings that had been released from the place of great disrespect. Those were the true ghosts, creatures born not from living souls, but from the deep, deep evil sealed within the place of great disrespect. The laughable truth was that even these wretched things had a hierarchy. The lowest of them bore no resemblance at all to humans. They were like muck, rolling across the ground and feeding on rotten corpses. Above those in the hierarchy were Gui, who had heads and bipedal bodies, giving them the approximate shape of humans. But they were covered from head to toe with pustules, and their features were twisted. Their nature was one of brutality. These were known as Yochu. The higher ranked any individual Gui was, the closer they seemed to human. At the top were the kings of the Gui, ethereally lovely, like flowers blooming in blood. The more blood-tainted they were, the greater their beauty. Legend told that two such kings had existed beneath the Great Seal, peerless and unique. Considered in a certain light, the pair of them were even more precious than the three sovereigns in the mortal realm. What a coincidence, then, that when Kunlun Jun passed through the forest where footnote, Kwafu is a mythological giant whose attempt to catch the sun is a metaphor for optimism and willingness to face challenges for a goal. When he died, his club became a peach forest. meeting in a peach forest is a traditional image for lovers in Chinese media. Damn, we are up to our heads in lore. What a coincidence, then, that when Kunlun Jun passed through the forest where Kwafu was buried, he encountered one. This was a boy with black hair and impossibly dark eyes. He sat with appalling posture atop a huge rock with his unbound hair flowing freely around him. He was the picture of impropriety, barefoot and clad in a coarse hemp garment that someone had given him. Kunlun Jun's unexpected appearance in the woods evidently gave him a terrible shock. He slipped and tumbled down from the rock, landing in the little creek below. There he sat, sopping wet. Even as Kunlun Jun stood there, trying not to laugh, a yochu climbed up from beneath the earth and clamped its jaws on the boy's slender, delicate neck. The young king's hand came flying up out of the water at a strange angle, closing over the yochu's mouth and shoving its head under the water. He pressed down on it with such force that half of the yochu's head shattered, spraying blood across the king's clean face like red plum blossoms unfurling in the snow. The young king peeked at Kunlun Jun, then looked at the blood all over himself. Somewhat embarrassed, he carefully squatted down and rinsed his face and hands in the creek. That done, he pulled the yochu's body closer and opened his mouth, revealing his sharp fangs. He started to gnaw at the most delicate part, the neck. The beautiful boy sat in the bloody water, daintily feeding on the yochu's corpse. Noticing that Kunlun Jun was still watching, he couldn't help eating more slowly, carefully chewing with his mouth closed and not letting blood dribble out. Then he licked his lips lightly, as though hoping to lick away every trace of blood and appear a bit more refined. It was true that Kunlun Jun had lent his soul fire to the Gui, but his intention had been only to break the path to heaven. He didn't deign to interact with these primitive, low-level things. He didn't particularly care for them. But somehow, seeing this young Gui, he found himself stepping closer. "Aren't you one of the kings of the Gui, child? Why aren't you with the others? Why are you pretending to be human?" The young king lowered his head silently for a while before quietly saying, "They're filthy." Kunlun Jun's interest was piqued. "You think your fellow Gui are filthy?" The boy didn't dare look directly at him. Instead, he stared at Kunlun Jun's reflection on the water's surface. With intense sincerity, he said, "What do they know other than killing and eating? I don't want to be with them." "That's just how the Gui are," said Kunlun Jun. Darkness flooded the boy's gaze. But when he looked up at Kunlun Jun, he successfully restrained his innate brutality. It seemed like something he did often. "Must I act as they do, just because we are the same?" he asked earnestly. Kunlun Jun stood frozen. There was still a bit of yochu blood at the corner of the young king's eye, but his gaze was as clear as autumn water. The boy stood up in the creek. It seemed he might have lost his appetite because he hauled the yochu's corpse out of the water and threw it aside. Then he leaned over and wrung the water out of his coarse clothing before climbing onto the bank of the creek. He glanced at Kunlun Jun again. His eyes were like a crow's feather fallen on clean, pure snow, a perfect stark contrast of black and white. "I don't want to live like that," he said. "If I must, then I might as well not live at all. I would rather die than live in a way not of my own choosing." It's the inherent queerness to live as yourself on your own terms that is evidently baked into the creation myth of this universe. The little king sat down casually by the water's edge, leaving his wet feet to dry. He stared into the distance, taking in the mountains beyond the grove, the mist and snow, and the endless torrential rain falling from the lightning-torn sky. Kunlun Jun couldn't help asking, "What are you looking at?" The boy pointed in the direction he was looking. "It's pretty." "The rain? What's pretty about the rain?" As Kunlun Jun spoke, he sat down next to him and leaned against the huge rock. "You should see the peak of Kunlun Mountain under a clear sky. When the golden sunlight streams down and caresses the snow, it looks like flowers blooming on all that white. There are expanses of craggy rocks under the layer of ice, and in the summer, when the snow thins, you can glimpse them here and there. A fine grass grows there, and all sorts of nameless little flowers. All flowers of that sort are called gulsong flowers. Enraptured by his words, the boy stared at him attentively. Kunlun Jun's description suddenly broke off. You can't see them now, though. Why not? In order to release you and your brethren, I poked a hole in the sky. Kunlun Jun impulsively reached out and patted the young king's head, and found that his hair was as soft as it looked. The boy held his neck stiffly, but he didn't move, docilely allowing Kunlun Jun to pet him. It was almost impossible to imagine that he had only just been gnawing on Ayochu's neck, even with traces of gore still around his mouth. Kunlun Jun was suddenly reminded of the little fur ball he had raised. Why did you poke a hole in the sky? You wouldn't understand, child. Kunlun Jun pressed gently down on his head. But the young king looked up at him with a tremendously earnest expression. I do understand. I used to be trapped under the Great Seal with no idea what was outside. If I'd known how beautiful it is out here, I would have poked a hole through the seal myself years ago. They keep having fundamental things in common. Okay. Kunlun Jun shook his head, laughing quietly. I would rather die than live in a way not of my own choosing, Imagine that. You do understand me. Up in the air, Nua flickered in and out of view as she rushed around trying to collect the stones of many hues that could mend the sky. Creatures all throughout the land had been plunged into turmoil, but Kunlun felt a peculiar satisfaction. He stood up to leave, and the young king of the Gui did the same, following close behind. Kunlun Jun didn't stop him. He raised a hand sharply, and a tall mountain rumbled up out of the ground in the southeast, in the land of Penglai. Penglai? Glai, I think. He beckoned to the Wu and the Yao, signaling them to go to Penglai to shelter from the disasters. At that time, the days of heavy rain finally resulted in a great flood. From the highlands to the northwest, water surged eastward, advancing relentlessly. Waves crashed over thousands of miles. Of arid land. Devastated, the living wept, while Zhuanshu knelt and kowtowed, pleading to the heavens. But the heavens didn't care. The water kept coming. Hoya led the Wu up Penglai, kowtowing after each step. There were young children in the crowd who didn't know what was going on. They cried and fussed until the adults, terrified and panicked, feared that the children's cries would disturb the gods and bring calamity upon them all. So they covered up the children's mouths, and along the way, some children were smothered to death. Shit! Okay. Halfway up the mountain, the flood caught up to them. Half of the people still struggling to climb up were swept away. On the mountain's highest peak, the cold-hearted god closed his eyes. Then from the west there came a bedraggled crowd carrying all their possessions on their backs. At the front of the group was a very old man carrying a medicine basket, leading them toward Penglai. The northern emperor, Zhuanshu, trailed deferentially behind him. Watching from the peak, Kunlun Jun saw a familiar face. Shenong, he murmured. Down among the people, Shenong looked up. A flash of divine lightning seemed to be reflected in his murky eyes. Kunlun didn't stop him. All along, his fight had been only against heaven's will. He had never wanted or deigned to kill these living beings himself. He watched Shenong lead the surviving humans from the central plains up the difficult slope of Penglai. Zhuanshu bowed and kowtowed to the statue of Kunlun Jun, expressing his gratitude for the mountain god's protection. It wasn't until the humans had dispersed that Kunlun finally appeared before Shenong. The white-haired old man slapped him cleanly across the face, and Kunlun allowed it. Spider Duck is correct. Myths, no chill. Myths have no chill whatsoever. They never met Chill. They don't know her. They have no idea. Not a single clue. A good myth, the most unhinged thing that could ever possibly be thought of ever. The young king of the Gui at Kunlun Jun's side was another story. He bared his beastly claws and roared, but before he could pounce at Shenong, the mountain god reached out and stopped him. Looking at the age-stricken Shenong, Kunlun said quietly, "You're no longer a god. You're about to die." Shenong's murky eyes rested on him. "I'll die a worthy death. It's nothing I didn't bring upon myself. And you were born from the great mountains, innately connected to the evil of the chaos, not to mention the 3 ethereal souls you absorbed from the axe of Pangu that opened the sky. Long, long ago, I said that your very existence was a terrible omen, and that you would one day usher in great ruin. That's why I had drifting snow cover Kunlun Mountain's peak year-round, so that it might hone your spirit. And yet here you are anyway. You can't let go of eternity, you're unable to see through right and wrong, you can't differentiate between good and evil, and you don't understand life and death." Okay. It's only exactly what his dad said to him. What? A chapter ago? "How dare you try to go against the will of the heavens? You..." And then Shenong sighed. His words were a dark premonition of what was to come. On the 3rd day, the night sky fell into disarray. The Gui walked the land. On the 4th day, the floodwaters rose, and all living creatures continued their migration up the mountains. With the Wu and the Yao in such close proximity, the long, simmering conflict between them finally exploded. On the 7th day, the Wu and Yao continued to fight. Half of their population was dead or wounded. The Flame and Yellow Emperor's descendants and Chios, I saw the pronunciation, but it's something that just totally locks up. I would have to practice the pronunciation of this off stream. So I'm shortchanging it to Chio, and I apologize. The Flame and Yellow Emperor's descendants and Chio's descendants formed an alliance as they tried desperately to survive. On the 12th day, Nua finally repaired the ever-raining sky. She used the great turtle's legs as the new pillars of heaven, leaving her completely exhausted. On the 13th day, the conflict between Wu and Yao came to a head. The natural order collapsed. The Gui swept across the continent, the 4 pillars shook, and the northwestern sky swayed on the verge of caving in. The sky and earth were about to become one again. The Gui were going to consume everything. All would return to chaos. Nua asked me to pass along the word. She has already enforced the 4 pillars and now intends to turn herself into Ho-Tu in order to secure the great Fuxia seal, Shenong said wearily. "You weren't wrong, Kunlun. Pangu wasn't wrong. None of us were wrong. However, the thousands of trials and tribulations of the mortal realm and all the wars and disasters of the living, they are all predetermined. Fuxia was silent in life, and so he died in silence. Recalcitrant as you are, your death will be the same. As for me, I am dying like a mortal. My body is giving out. All of this was written in the stars. No one can fight it. If anything is to blame, it's that you know too much." Out of nowhere, Kunlun said, "Chio once entrusted both the Wu and Yao to me. Now the 2 groups are at odds, unwilling to coexist even on the tiny shelter of Penglai. It seems that heaven's will is that I must choose which will survive, lest they all die together. Is that right?" Shenong looked at him in silence. After what seemed like an eternity, Kunlun finally murmured, "Then let the Yao remain." Shenong gave a great sigh, knowing Kunlun had reached the end of his rope. No choice remained but to bow to heaven's will. The great floods finally calmed. Nua had dealt a heavy blow to the king of the Gui, who wielded a giant axe in imitation of Pangu. She became Ho-Tu and filled the gap in the Great Seal, forcing the Gui back under the 4 pillars. But repairing the sky had used up too much of her energy even before the grave injury she had sustained from the king of the Gui's axe. The great Fuxia seal had been patched over, but only barely. It still seemed ready to rupture at any moment. Shenong sat in the great hall of Kunlun-jun's palace in silence. "I expected to die from the piercing lightning," said Kunlun suddenly. "I didn't imagine that my grave was prepared from the moment I blinded the divine dragon and toppled Buzhou Mountain." Shenong raised his aged eyes to look upon the very last of the 4 sages of the Great Wild. He couldn't speak. Perhaps Kunlun Jun could leave. Perhaps he could use his matchless powers as the mountain god of the great wild to cut Kunlun Mountain off from the world. Even if heaven and earth once again returned to chaos, no one could intervene. But Kunlun's 3 ethereal souls had arisen from the axe that sundered the earth and sky. He alone would never go against Pangu's wishes. Kunlun himself was Pangu's will. I wish I could see my little furball one more time. Shenong, medicine basket on his back, walked slowly into the deep mountains. By this time, Nua's silhouette was nearly impossible to discern. Everything seemed to be headed toward a dead end. Returning to his cold, desolate hall, Kunlun Jun looked back and realized that the only one still by his side was the black-haired, black-eyed king of the Gui, who looked so soft and thin. Very quietly, the young king of the Gui asked, "Are you going to put me back behind the Great Seal?" "No. Everything else is out of my hands, but at least I can keep you safe." Kunlun Jun laughed quietly. A brief, vicious spasm racked his body, and an imperceptible tremor entered his voice. "Since you don't want to be a Gui, I'll give you what you want." Shocked, the boy grabbed for Kunlun Jun's shoulder, but Kunlun's body was already translucent, his face as pale as snow. The mountain god raised a hand. His vast sleeves stirred a fresh breeze, and a flame as resplendent as stardust gathered in his palm. "Take it." The boy accepted it with both hands. "This is the soul fire from my left shoulder." Sweat beaded Kunlun Jun's forehead, but still he smiled. "And I'll give you something else." As he spoke, his body began to shake violently. He pulled a long silver tendon from his body. In doing so, he endured a pain more excruciating than any in the world. He seemed not to see the boy's red-rimmed eyes. "Take my divine tendon," he said. "From this day forward, you can be free of the place of great disrespect and rank among the gods. Guard over the 4 pillars for me. With Nuwa's reincarnation dial, Fuchsia's mountain river all, the brush from the ancient merit tree. And I'll give you one last..." "Kunlun!" Kunlun Jun touched a thumb to the young boy's face, lifting it. Softly, he said, "Stone that is aged but not yet old. Water that is frozen but not yet cold. Body that is dead but not yet born. Soul that is melted but not yet burned." Since Shenong was willing to set aside his divine status to become immortal, I'll add one more thing to his pile of good deeds, and let him sympathize with humans until the end. With those words, he coughed up his heart's blood into his hands, where it became a dark red wick. The mountain god of the great wild became increasingly transparent, weaker by the second. Finally, he disappeared completely, leaving behind a snow-white oil lamp. There were 2 words engraved in the corner. Soul Guardian. Soul that is melted but not yet burned. The soul guarding lamp. At last, the pillars stood once again. The 4 hallowed artifacts were assembled, the mountain god had faded into thin air, and the 3 sovereigns were gone without a trace. The responsibility for the 4 pillars that held up the sky had, by chance, fallen to the young king of the Gui, who had divinity forced upon him. All that weight lay on his shoulders. It was Kunlun Jun's last taunt to the heavens. Once he took up that burden, he faced millions of years with no end in sight. Not even the end of the volume. Oh no, there's half a page, excuse me. That's technically a scene break. Hang on. Zhao Yunlan felt as though there'd been an explosion in his skull. It was as if he had once again endured the excruciating pain of having a tendon pulled out of him, compounded with the agony of 10,000 mountains resting upon his shoulders, and the suffering of being driven beyond what he could bear by the heavens, of being bound with no hope of escape. Millennia swam before his eyes. A timeless sigh came from the depths of the great divine tree. A low voice said, "Why did you have to do all this?" Pungu? White light flared before Zhao Yunlan's eyes. His head was suddenly heavy, and his feet were light. By the time he opened his eyes again, he was back in Dragon City, with festive Lunar New Year cheer filling the air. All the lights at Four Bright Avenue had already been turned off. The canopy of the evergreen pines in the courtyard covered the sky. Feeling something cold on his face, Zhao Yunlan pressed a hand to his cheek and found it wet with tears. Simply overwhelmed. Simply overwhelmed. Over-fucking-whelmed. Overly offended as well that this is how they chose to round off Volume 2. Can't argue with it. Makes perfect narrative sense. The perfect place to end the volume. Yet, I'm still furious. How fucking dare you? What? I'm too overwhelmed. That was so much. So much. Too much, you might say. That was... You know, of all of the overwhelming detail of that, creation myth, Kunlun played he played an integral role, and sometimes, a definitive role in so many aspects of humanity that we come to know today, like defying the heavens, which is very Lucifer of him, right? Instilling free will. And that's, I'm so overwhelmed that I can only describe that as just terribly fucking cool. That he played, without being Nua, right? Without being one of the most major deities, but still significant. Having that kind of role in how all of creation and humanity and all that just played out, but also witnessing a lot of things. That's just, maybe it's more common in Chinese mythology. But for me, never quite seen this blend of things before. Very interesting. I'd be curious to know if Priest wrote that section, that whole section, first. If that was sort of where she started and then she built out everything from there, or if she started with the present day stuff and then created the myth that would reinforce all of it. I want to know which direction she worked in, because I feel like she could have started with the myth and then just built out from there. Oh yeah, and if you're reading this at the time that it was being released, at the time the translation was being released, that's months in between volumes. I only got to wait a couple of days because we're starting volume 3 just on Thursday. Y'all having to wait. Fucking wild. Sweet Jesus. Okay. Speaking of which, I will be here on Thursday to start volume 3, whatever that means, because we meet up on Tuesdays and Thursdays to read the good gay stuff from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. usually. Eastern, right now it's Eastern Daylight Time. That's the gig. That's what we do. So we're going to be diving directly into volume 3 here in just a couple of days. And I'm going to need a couple of days to wrap my head around everything she just told me. Priest is getting there, I tell you what. So I will see you guys in a couple of days. I hope the week is treating you well as humanly fucking possible. And I will see you for volume 3. I love you all very, very much. Thank you so much for stopping by. And I'm going to go stare at a wall for about 10 minutes, okay? All right. I'll see you Thursday.